For 15 long years, my parents treated me as though I barely existed. In their eyes, I was the family's greatest disappointment, the child who never lived up to expectations. While every ounce of admiration was reserved for my older brother, I became invisible in my own home, pushed aside whenever praise was being handed out and remembered only when there was criticism to deliver. Then, on a cold, rainy Tuesday evening, everything changed with a single text message from my grandmother. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a confused recipe for her famous apple pie. But the moment I read it, my heart nearly stopped. Hidden inside those harmless-looking ingredients was a secret distress signal we had created together years before. It wasn't a recipe, it was a desperate cry for help. My parents believed I was barely surviving, an aimless freelancer struggling to make rent and wondering how to afford my next meal. They had spent years convincing themselves that I had accomplished nothing with my life. What they never imagined was that I had deliberately allowed them to believe that story. They had absolutely no idea what I actually did or the level of authority and responsibility I carried every day. Exactly 30 minutes after reading that message, my car came to a screeching stop outside their house. My parents smirked as I walked toward the front porch, expecting another opportunity to remind me of my failures. Then they looked behind me and watched two police cruisers pull into the driveway. Their smiles disappeared instantly. My name is Emma. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life I have played the role my parents assigned to me. In our family, appearances mattered more than kindness, and success was measured by expensive cars, impressive job titles, and the opinions of strangers. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, built their entire identity around those shallow values. Every conversation reminded me that I ranked last in their carefully organized hierarchy. No matter what happened, I could never earn their approval because they had already decided who I was. According to them, I was an unemployed nobody trying to scrape together enough freelance work to survive inside a tiny apartment. Every visit came with unwanted lectures about finding a real career, saving money, or finally becoming someone they could be proud of. They spoke to me with that painful combination of pity and disappointment that cuts deeper than anger ever could. Meanwhile, my brother Julian could do no wrong. He was their perfect success story. As a corporate consultant, he arrived at every family gathering in another luxury car, wearing another tailored suit, carrying another story about promotions, business deals, and expensive vacations. Dinner conversations revolved entirely around him. His accomplishments became family celebrations. His opinions were treated like absolute truth. Whenever attention drifted toward me for even a moment, my mother would quickly redirect the conversation, unwilling to let anyone dwell on what she considered my embarrassing life. What none of them understood was that my apparent failure was completely intentional. Years earlier, I realized that revealing my success would only feed their need for control and constant interference. Keeping my real life hidden became my way of protecting my peace. I never corrected their assumptions. I allowed them to underestimate me because their ignorance gave me something priceless: freedom. They believed they knew exactly who I was, when in reality they had no clue. The one person who always saw through the illusion was my grandmother, Evelyn. She never judged me by income, titles, or appearances. She loved me without conditions, and she recognized the manipulation happening inside our family long before I found the courage to admit it myself. She was also the only person who knew the truth about my career. While everyone else measured worth by status, she valued honesty, compassion, and character. As she grew older, her health gradually declined. My parents insisted that moving her into their large suburban home was an act of love, claiming she needed constant care. I knew better. Once she was under their roof, they controlled nearly every part of her life. Visitors became limited. Phone calls were monitored. Her independence slowly disappeared. Everything was presented as concern, but beneath the surface it felt much more like control. Because we both understood exactly how they operated, Grandma Evelyn and I prepared for the possibility that one day she might need help without being able to ask openly. Together we created a secret emergency code hidden inside an ordinary apple pie recipe. One specific ingredient placed in the wrong amount or wrong order would carry a completely different meaning. If I ever received that version of the recipe, it meant she wasn't baking at all. It meant she was trapped, being pressured into something against her will, and needed me immediately. Before I tell you exactly what happened after that message arrived, if you're enjoying this story, make sure you stay with the Payback files until the very end. And let me know what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. I never honestly believed I would receive that message. It was simply a precaution we hoped would never be necessary. Yet that evening, sitting alone in my home office with only the glow of 2 computer monitors lighting the room, my phone buzzed across the desk. I glanced at the screen and saw Grandma Evelyn's name. The message read, "Emma, don't forget to add 3 tablespoons of vinegar to the apple pie filling tonight, so it sets correctly." Anyone else would have laughed and assumed an elderly grandmother had mixed up one of her recipes. But I felt every ounce of warmth leave my body. Vinegar. 3 tablespoons. Filling first. Every incorrect detail matched the code we had memorized years before. Its meaning was unmistakable. I am being forced to sign something. I am not safe. Come now. Without hesitating, I dropped the phone beside my keyboard and opened an encrypted system on my secure laptop. This was the part of my life my family could never have imagined. I wasn't a struggling freelancer barely making ends meet. I was a senior forensic auditor and specialized security contractor working alongside federal law enforcement on major financial crime investigations. My job involved exposing fraud, tracing stolen assets, uncovering digital evidence, and responding to situations where every second mattered. For 15 years, my parents had looked down on me while remaining completely unaware that I spent my career helping authorities dismantle sophisticated criminal operations. Training had taught me that panic only wastes valuable time. Clear thinking saves lives. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision as encrypted files opened one after another. Instead of dialing emergency services through the public system, I contacted my primary federal law enforcement liaison using a secure priority channel reserved for active contractors. Within moments, the response I needed was already in motion, and as I headed toward my parents' house, I knew one thing with complete certainty. The carefully crafted illusion my family had believed for 15 years was about to collapse right in front of them. Barely 90 seconds after making that secure call, I was speaking directly with a dispatch supervisor. I explained that I had reason to believe an elderly woman was being financially exploited and pressured into signing legal documents against her will. I gave them my parents' address, requested an immediate welfare check, and confirmed that officers had already been assigned and were heading there without delay. The moment I ended the call, I grabbed my coat, slipped my encrypted government-issued tablet into my bag, and rushed out the front door. Under normal conditions, the drive to my parents' neighborhood would have taken close to 45 minutes. That night, every second felt impossibly heavy. Rain streaked across the windshield while my thoughts stayed locked on one image alone. My grandmother sitting somewhere inside that house, waiting and hoping I would understand her message before it was too late. Adrenaline sharpened every instinct, and somehow I reached the familiar driveway in just 30 minutes, exactly as the clock kept ticking from the moment her text had arrived. My tires slid to a stop on the wet pavement, and I climbed out without hesitation. The house looked exactly as it always had, polished, impressive, and carefully designed to project perfection. But I knew better than anyone that appearances inside those walls had always been deceptive. I climbed the front steps and knocked firmly against the heavy oak door. Almost immediately it swung open. My mother stood there holding a crystal wine glass, dressed as elegantly as ever. The instant she recognized me, a smug smile spread across her face. "Emma," she said with a laugh that carried more judgment than warmth. "What could possibly bring you here this late? Please don't tell me you've come asking your father for money again." She never had the chance to finish. Bright red and blue lights suddenly washed across the front porch as 2 police cruisers rolled into the driveway behind me. The confidence vanished from her expression so quickly it almost looked unreal. Her eyes darted from the flashing lights back to my face, searching for an explanation that wasn't coming. I didn't waste time arguing. Without acknowledging her shocked silence, I stepped inside, and the two uniformed officers followed close behind. Together we moved through the entryway and down the hallway toward the formal dining room. Even before we reached it, I could feel the tension hanging in the air. The scene waiting inside confirmed every fear I had carried during the drive. My father sat rigidly beside my brother at the long mahogany table. Spread across its surface was a collection of legal documents, folders, and financial paperwork. At the head of the table sat Grandma Evelyn. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands trembled around an expensive fountain pen, and fear filled her eyes as she stared at the papers in front of her. My father shot to his feet. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted, slamming both hands onto the table hard enough to make the documents jump. "Emma, have you completely lost your mind? You brought the police into my home?" Beside him, Julian reacted even faster. He swept several documents beneath a leather portfolio, trying to hide them before the officers noticed. "You're making a scene over nothing," he snapped, forcing out the same arrogant confidence he always relied on. "This is private family business. You have absolutely no place interfering." Except I knew exactly what kind of business they were conducting. For years, my parents had admired Julian's expensive lifestyle without ever questioning how he managed to afford it. The luxury cars, designer clothes, extravagant vacations, and endless stories about successful deals had all been part of an illusion. Behind the polished image was a financial disaster. His consulting company had been collapsing under enormous debt, failed investments, and desperate attempts to stay afloat. Now the walls were closing in, and instead of accepting responsibility, he had chosen an easier target. Grandma Evelyn. The signatures they wanted weren't about helping her organize her estate. They were trying to seize control of everything she had spent a lifetime building: her savings, her properties, and the financial security she deserved to enjoy in peace. They believed they could intimidate her into surrendering it all before anyone realized what had happened. They also believed the daughter they had dismissed for 15 years would never understand what they were doing. That was their biggest mistake. I stepped closer to the table, and for the first time in my adult life, I let the quiet, apologetic version of myself disappear completely. I opened my bag, removed my encrypted tablet, and placed it squarely on the polished wood in front of Julian. "It's finished," I said evenly. He looked at me, confused for only a moment before uncertainty replaced his confidence. My father immediately moved between us. "You've always been jealous of your brother," he barked. "You're an unemployed failure pretending to understand things that are far beyond you." I met his stare without raising my voice. "No," I answered calmly. "I understand business extremely well." I tapped the screen, especially when it's criminal. The display came alive with encrypted forensic reports, authenticated financial records, digital timestamps, and transaction histories that had been verified through secure investigative systems while I was driving to the house. I turned the screen toward the officers. "These transfers began before I arrived," I explained. "Unauthorized access was obtained using forged digital authorization, linked to my grandmother's accounts. More than $200,000 has already been diverted through shell companies connected to Julian." The room fell completely silent. Julian's face drained of every trace of color. My mother looked from the screen to her son as though she no longer recognized him. My father stood frozen, unable to form another argument. Because of my position as a senior cyber forensic auditor working alongside federal investigators, every record displayed on that screen carried immediate evidentiary value. The officers didn't need to guess what they were looking at. The lead officer stepped forward, closed the portfolio covering the remaining documents, and looked directly at Julian. Julian Whitaker, he said firmly, you are under arrest for grand larceny and financial exploitation of an elderly person. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place echoed through the room. Julian's composure shattered instantly. The man who had spent years presenting himself as untouchable broke down as officers escorted him away. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in disbelief. My father simply stared at me. And for the first time in 15 years, there wasn't a trace of superiority left in his expression. He finally understood. The daughter they had mocked, underestimated, and dismissed as worthless had been the only person capable of stopping everything. 3 months later, every illusion my family had built had completely collapsed. Julian accepted responsibility in court, pleading guilty to charges that included grand larceny and elder financial abuse. His carefully manufactured reputation disappeared overnight, replaced by a lengthy prison sentence. My parents faced consequences of their own. Their involvement in the scheme left them buried beneath legal expenses, restitution, and financial penalties, so severe they were forced to sell the very estate they had always used as a symbol of their success. The wealth they had flaunted for years vanished almost as quickly as it had been displayed. As for Grandma Evelyn, she finally found the peace she deserved. Using the resources I had quietly built over the years, I moved her into a beautiful waterfront residence where she receives genuine care, complete independence, and the kindness she had spent a lifetime giving to everyone else. Watching her smile without fear has been worth more than every professional achievement I've ever earned. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are convinced they already know your story. They mistake silence for weakness and humility for failure. But the truth has a way of revealing itself when it matters most. If you discovered your own family crossing a line like this, what would you do? Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who spent years believing you would never amount to anything? Let me know in the comments, and before you go, be sure to check out the other stories here on the Payback Files. You never know which one might surprise you next. Thanks for staying with me until the very end.